the day his mother slapped me in front of our guests. He poured her a glass of wine and said, "You showed her who's boss, Mom?" I stood there, my cheeks stinging, the taste of humiliation burning hotter than the wine I had spilled. Around me, a few guests chuckled awkwardly. Others looked away, pretending not to notice. No one asked if I was okay. No one said a word. He didn't flinch. My husband. The man I had left my career for. The man I cooked for, cleaned for, sacrificed everything for. He just smiled and toasted her like they were celebrating a victory. I used to think I was his wife. Turns out I was just the live-in help paid in silence and treated like a nuisance. There were no apologies that night. No whispered comforts when the guests had gone. Only the clatter of dishes in the sink and his voice from the hallway. "You embarrassed her, Celine. You really need to be more careful." I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of the house that never felt like mine, next to a man who never really saw me. And yet, I stayed for months, for years. I stayed through the insults, the control, the constant walking on eggshells, until the night everything broke. If it were you, would you have stayed? I did. Until the day I disappeared, and they never saw it coming. My name is Celine, and if I could go back to the day I first met Paul, his warm smile, his steady voice, the way he held the door open, like a scene from some suburban fairy tale, I'd tell that younger version of me to run. Not because he was overtly cruel or threatening, but because sometimes the most dangerous prisons come wrapped in politeness, and the people who build them smile while they lock the doors behind you. Back then, I was 29, working as a certified public accountant in a small firm in Chicago, living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the north side that creaked with every step, but smelled like lavender and burnt coffee, my coffee. And though the work was demanding and the days were long, there was a strange kind of peace in the repetition, the soft hum of the copier, the rustle of papers, the smell of toner, and the satisfying clack of my keyboard when I closed out a perfect report. My parents didn't have much. My dad was a carpenter. My mom worked part-time at the library, but they raised me to be proud of the life I built with my own hands, and I had never depended on anyone until Paul entered my life, like a calm breeze in the middle of a storm, with promises of stability, warmth, and partnership that felt like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even said out loud. We met at a friend's engagement party where he offered to refill my drink and stayed by my side for the rest of the night. And within weeks, we were inseparable dinners that turned into long walks, shared playlists, gentle kisses on street corners, and a sense of being chosen that rarely admits he sold homes for me, had a reputation for honesty and kindness, and spoke about his mother Odette with the kind of reverence that made me think he was a good son, a good man, the kind who'd never forget the people who raised him. And when he suggested 6 months into dating that we should get married and move in with her, just until we save for a down payment, I ignored the small voice inside me that whispered warnings. Because isn't compromise part of love? Odette lived in a pristine house just outside the city, with perfectly trimmed hedges, doilies on every surface, and silence that pressed against the walls, like wallpaper. She greeted me at the front door, not with warmth, but with a thin-lipped smile, and eyes that scanned me like I was a guest overstaying her welcome. And the first thing she said to me before asking my name, before offering me a seat, was, "I hope you don't mind getting up early. Paul likes his eggs before 7. At first, it was subtle, like smoke creeping in under the door. She didn't approve of my perfume too loud, she said, or the way I dressed heels are for women with something to prove. And though Paul always chuckled and said Mom's just old-fashioned, I began waking up earlier, dressing plainer, wearing less makeup, telling myself that blending in was easier than constantly defending who I was. When we got married, I quit my job, partly because Paul insisted it made more sense financially, and partly because I wanted to show that I was committed to our life together, to building a home, not realizing, of course, that this so-called home already had a queen, and I was merely another servant waiting to be broken in. My days quickly became a blur of tasks, waking at 5 to prepare breakfast the way she liked it, scrubbing the floors on my hands and knees, because only lazy women use mops folding laundry, so precisely that any wrinkle was treated like a personal failure. I was always standing at the kitchen door, when guests arrived ready to serve, never to speak, because a good wife doesn't insert herself where she's not invited. Paul changed too, at first slowly, like a man adjusting to a new rhythm. But eventually he stopped saying thank you, stopped asking how I was, stopped defending me, and began parroting his mother's words. Why are you always so sensitive? Or, you don't work. Celine, how hard can it be? Until I began to believe that maybe it was me. Maybe I was too soft, too slow, too selfish. There was a day, I remember it vividly, when I asked to visit my parents for the weekend, and Odette looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "A man who marries down deserves better than this," before explaining that associating with working-class people like my father could damage Paul's reputation in the community. And when I turned to Paul, hoping for some ounce of disagreement, he just muttered, "Maybe she's right, babe. It's not a good look." I cried that night silently in the bathroom with the water running, so no one would hear, because it hit me that I had no one left, that the man I loved had become a stranger, and the family I had entered treated me more like a housekeeper than a human being. Things escalated further when I noticed money missing from my purse, small amounts at first 20, here 40 there, until one day I walked in to find Odette rifling through my wallet, and when I asked what she was doing, she replied with chilling calm, "I needed some cash. It's not like you're earning it anyway." And Paul, when confronted, just sighed and said, "Let her be, Celine. You're always making things bigger than they are." I think that was the moment something inside me cracked, not in a loud, dramatic way, but like hairline fractures in glass that quietly spread until the whole surface is no longer safe. And though I kept smiling, kept cooking, kept folding towels and vacuuming rugs, washing clothes from the chairs, I knew if I didn't find a way out, I'd disappear completely. I told myself things would get better, that maybe motherhood would change her, that maybe Paul would wake up and realize what was happening, that maybe if I just held on a little longer, I'd be seen. But sometimes love blinds us so completely. We mistake captivity for commitment, and I was trapped. Until one night at a dinner party, meant to celebrate family, I made one small mistake, one accidental spill, and the illusion shattered with the sharp sting of her hand across my face. And that's where the real story begins. The slap didn't come out of nowhere, though. That's how it felt in the moment. Sudden, sharp, humiliating. But looking back, it was the natural crescendo of a life lived under constant pressure, of a house held together by silence, obedience, and the fragile illusion that enduring pain is a virtue. That night, with the crystal glass still trembling in my hand, and the red wine soaking into the linen tablecloth, I realized that I had crossed an invisible line, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had dared to exist, to be seen, to take up space, in a place where I had been slowly, systematically erased. It was Paul's uncle's birthday, one of those suburban picture-perfect gatherings, with too much cheese and too little kindness. And I had been serving appetizers all evening, balancing plates with shaking hands and a practiced smile, while Odette watched me like a hawk from the head of the table. I was refilling her wine when someone bumped into me, probably one of the cousins reaching for another shrimp cocktail, and the glass tipped forward, splashing her blouse with a small, perfectly accidental blot of red. She didn't hesitate. Her hand shot out quick and practiced like she had done it before, like this wasn't rage, but reflex. And when the slap landed, there was a gasp, a brief instantly swallowed by dream. No one moved. No one said a word. Paul, standing just a few feet away, didn't come to me, didn't ask if I was okay. He turned to his mother, poured her a fresh glass, and said with a grin, "You showed her who's boss, Mom." Something died in me that night. The next morning, I didn't speak. I woke at 5, made breakfast as usual, scrubbed the floors with aching knees, and stared out the window while the sun rose over the neighbor's yard like nothing had changed. But everything had. And in that silence, I began to pay attention. I started noticing things I had ignored before, how Odette would accidentally spill tea on my clean laundry and demand I wash it again, how she'd leave notes criticizing my seasoning or the way I set the table, how she'd rearrange things I'd already cleaned, just to remind me who held control over the space I lived in. One morning, she handed me a rag and said, "You're using the mop too much. It's lazy. A good wife cleans with her hands." I bled that day. The tile in the kitchen was rough, and by the time I finished scrubbing every inch of it, my knuckles were raw, and my back throbbed from bending too long. But when I looked up for some acknowledgement, some flicker of approval, Odette simply walked past me and said, "You missed a spot." The worst part wasn't what she did. It was what Paul didn't do. He came home later, and later, always tired, always distracted, barely kissing me on the cheek before heading to bed. And when I tried to talk to him about how I felt about his mother's behavior, he rolled his eyes and said, "You're always complaining. Do you know how lucky you are to have a roof over your head?" One night, I suggested we visit my parents. My father had called asking if I was okay, his voice hesitant like he knew something wasn't right, but didn't want to say it aloud. And I told Paul that it would be nice to get away for a weekend to see my parents. I stared at him for a long time before replying. "Your dad's a broke carpenter, and your mom talks too much. What are we going to do there? Embarrass ourselves?" I think that was the first time I felt real fear, not of being hit, but of disappearing so completely that even the people who loved me wouldn't be allowed to find me. And yet, the moment that finally broke the last thread of hope came not from words, but from theft. I had tucked a small envelope into my purse, a gift card I had received from an old friend, tucked inside a birthday card with a sweet note. It was nothing extravagant, but it was mine, a reminder that someone out there still saw me as a person. A few days later, it was gone. When I asked Odette, she shrugged and said I needed to pick up a few things. What's yours is ours, right? I turned to Paul, desperate for support, but he didn't even look up from his phone. "She needed it," he said. "It's not that deep." That night, I stood in the bathroom staring at my reflection in the mirror, hair pulled back in a bun skin, pale from exhaustion, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, and I didn't recognize the woman looking back. I had given up everything, my job, my independence, my voice, and in return, I had been reduced to a shadow in my own life, expected to serve to smile, to never complain. Still, I told myself to hold on, until I overheard them. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had returned from the grocery store, early bags of produce in my arms keys still dangling from my fingers, when I heard voices in the kitchen. I paused in the hallway just out of sight and listened. "She's a wreck," Odette said. "Always tired, always anxious. If we don't do something soon, she's going to snap. She won't." Paul replied, his voice disturbingly calm. "She doesn't have it in her. But maybe it's time to talk to someone. A facility, somewhere quiet, somewhere she can rest." I dropped the bag. Apples rolled across the floor like marbles. The voices stopped. They didn't see me, but I saw them. I saw everything. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. They wanted to get rid of me. Not through violence, not through divorce, but through something worse, by rewriting reality, by painting me as unstable, by locking me away where no one would hear me scream. And that's when something inside me shifted. I stopped reacting. I stopped arguing. I stopped crying. I became calm, collected, mechanical. I smiled at Odette's insults, nodded at Paul's dismissals, and waited. Because if they thought I was weak, they hadn't seen what a cornered woman could do, and if they thought they could bury me, they forgot I knew how to dig. I don't remember exactly when my body gave out, but I remember the sound. It wasn't a crash or a scream or anything cinematic. It was quiet, just the soft thud of knees against hardwood, and the clatter of a ceramic bowl I had been holding shattering into dozens of white petals across the kitchen floor. I remember trying to catch myself gripping the edge of the counter, but my fingers wouldn't close. Everything blurred, the tiles beneath me, the filtered sunlight coming through the window, the sound of Odette's voice somewhere above me saying, "She's being dramatic again." I had collapsed, not from illness, not from a fall, from exhaustion, from starvation of dignity, from the constant gnawing weight of humiliation, stress, and grief. I hadn't been eating properly for weeks. My sleep was broken into fragments, and my body faithful, until that moment finally whispered, "No more." When I opened my eyes, I was still on the floor. No ambulance, no husband kneeling beside me, no panic, just Odette's face looking down with cold annoyance, and the dish rag she tossed onto my chest like a bandage from the blood. "Get some rest," she murmured. "Always on the sea." Paul came. He called me from upstairs later that night, not to ask how I was, but to ask if I had remembered to set the alarm and put away the groceries before fainting. "I can't do everything, Celine," he said, like I was the one failing him. And still I stayed, until that night, until I heard it with my own ears, until the walls around me, the ones I'd painted with rationalizations and denial, came crashing down with one conversation that I was never meant to hear. It was almost midnight. I couldn't sleep, which wasn't unusual anymore. My body had become a stranger to rest. I wandered to the kitchen for some water, and paused when I heard voices low, deliberate, coming from the living room. I tiptoed closer, staying in the shadows, holding my breath as their words poured out like poison. "She's not well," Odette said, her voice laced with contempt rather than concern. "You see the way she flinches when someone walks into the room. It's becoming inconvenient. I've noticed Paul replied like he was talking about a broken appliance. I've already looked into some options. A clinic. It's private, out of state. She could get the help she needs. Odette scoffed. Help, Paul, that girl is a parasite. She won't change. You're trying to save something that's already spoiled. Paul hesitated, then said something that pierced deeper than any slap, deeper than any insult I had swallowed over the years. I just want peace. For you. For me. For this house. And if putting her in a facility is what it takes to get it, then maybe it's time. I stood there frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs, the glass in my hand trembling. In that moment, it became terrifyingly clear. They weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to erase me. Quietly, legally, permanently. That was the moment I stopped being a victim. That was the moment I didn't scream. I went back to bed and stared into the darkness with eyes wide open, my breath steady, my thoughts crystal clear. They wanted me silent. So I gave them silence. But it was the kind that comes before a storm. Over the next few days, I played my part better than ever. I smiled more, cooked their favorite meals, even complimented Odette on her hair, an insincere act she accepted with smug satisfaction. I became invisible again, just as they wanted, but this time I wasn't shrinking. I was preparing. I began documenting everything. I found my old phone, the one Paul didn't know about, buried at the back of my closet behind sweaters I hadn't worn in months, and used it to take pictures of bruises, to record whispered insults, to capture the cruel jokes they made about my appearance, my mental state, my worth. I waited until late at night, when the house was asleep, to email files to myself to back them up, to organize them by date and subject. I recorded the exact conversation I had overheard that night, using my phone tucked inside a box of tea on the shelf near the living room. I even began journaling daily, noting everything from times they spoke of institutionalizing me to small daily patterns of emotional neglect. Then, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Maya, an old colleague who now worked in media law. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, then said 6 words that would change the course of my life. Gather everything. I'll help you leave. She connected me to a lawyer, an expert in domestic coercion and emotional abuse. And together we began to build a case. I didn't want revenge. I wanted protection. I wanted the truth. I wanted to walk away with my name, my voice, and my life still intact. At the same time, I began reconnecting with my family. Cautiously, I sent my father a letter with no return address, just in case Paul or Odette decided to intercept me. I wrote to him, I'm not okay, but I'm finding my way out. Please be patient. I haven't forgotten you. My father replied with a note that simply read, The door is always open. Come home. And suddenly, I had something I hadn't felt in years. A way out. A choice. For weeks, I said nothing. I waited, watched, collected. I became so good at pretending that even Odette started letting her guard down. Even Paul began relaxing again, confident that I had been broken back into submission. They had no idea what was coming. They didn't realize the maid they had trained to obey had become a witness, and the silence they had forced upon me was now the weapon I would use to dismantle them. The house stayed quiet, but in my heart, something louder than rage began to grow. Conviction, purpose, and the hunger for freedom. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that smelled like overcooked sausages and artificial cheer. The kind of morning that tried to convince you everything was fine, simply because the sun was out, and there were balloons tied to the porch railing. It was Odette's birthday, and the house was buzzing with relatives. Plastic smiles, wine glasses, clinking, and polite lies exchanged like currency in every corner of the living room. I had baked her favorite lemon tart the night before, not out of love, but out of strategy, because I needed everything to appear normal. I wore the dress she liked, the beige one that made me look modest, and I greeted her with a kiss on the cheek and a soft happy birthday, while my stomach churned at the thought of what I was about to do. The documents had been sealed in a thick manila envelope, hidden inside the false bottom of a shoebox in my closet. For weeks, each page a piece of my buried voice, each file a brick in the path toward my freedom. I had rehearsed it in my head so many times. I could feel the rhythm of the words in my pulse. At exactly noon, while everyone was gathered in the dining room, raising glasses for a toast, and Odette was basking in the glow of her orchestrated adoration, I stepped forward, too quickly, not too timidly, and placed the envelope on the table in front of her. The room stilled. Her smile faltered. Paul narrowed his eyes. Someone chuckled awkwardly. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tight. I didn't answer. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small voice recorder, and pressed play. The sound of Paul's voice filled the room. "I just want peace. For you. For me. For this house. And if putting her in a facility is what it takes to get it, then maybe it's time." A gasp. Utensils clinked against porcelain. Someone dropped their fork. I let it play. Every word, every syllable. Then, in perfect silence, I opened the envelope and laid out the contents, printed transcripts, time-stamped recordings, photos of bruises, screenshots of text messages from Paul, mocking me a signed complaint prepared by my lawyer, and on top of it, all the divorce papers. I turned to Paul, who looked like the air had been knocked from his lungs, and then to Odette, whose mouth opened and closed, like she was searching for a script she hadn't written. "I won't scream," I said softly. "I won't make a scene. Because I've lived in your performance long enough. I just want you to know that I see you, all of you, and so will the court." Paul tried to speak something between pleading and rage rising in his voice, but I held up a hand. "It's done," I whispered. "The lawyer has everything. The media has what they need. You had made a scapegoat a punching bag, but she had a voice, and today she used it." And then, with the weight of silence behind me, and my past burning like old wallpaper peeling off clean, I turned around and walked out. Past the guests who couldn't meet my eyes. Past the staircase that had heard every sob. Past the kitchen where I had once collapsed. I didn't take anything with me, except my name. The sound of my own footsteps for the first time in years, leading me to servitude, to freedom. 6 months later, I live in a small third-floor apartment that smells of old books and fresh lavender. The windows creak when I open them. The radiator groans in the morning, and the elevator never quite reaches the top floor without a sigh. But it's mine. It's quiet here. Not the suffocating silence I once endured, but the kind that gives you space to breathe, to think, to come back to yourself. I went back to accounting. It wasn't easy at first. The gaps in my resume, the fear that I had lost too much of myself to rebuild. But the moment I sat behind a desk again, keyboard under my fingers, numbers dancing across the screen, like familiar friends, I knew I hadn't been broken beyond repair, just buried. And now, slowly, I was unearthing what was left. Paul lost his job 2 months after the incident. The recordings made their way online, through a quiet leak not from me, but from someone who believed the world should know what some people hide behind manicured lawns and family portraits. His agency cut ties with him almost overnight. No one wants a man on the front page of a tabloid with the headline, "Husband plots to commit wife for peace and quiet." Odette was worse. The court ordered her to undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and therapy. Her friends stopped calling. Her book club, the one she used to host with such snobbish pride, dissolved. The woman who had once dictated the temperature of an entire house with a single raised eyebrow was now legally forbidden from contacting me, her presence reduced to a name on a restraining order and a reminder of how power can rot behind a smile. But I didn't do any of this out of vengeance. I didn't touch a hair on their heads. I didn't raise my voice. All I did was tell the truth, and finally let it echo where it needed to be heard. I've joined a local support group who smile at our surveillance, who were told they were crazy for meeting me and survivor. We meet every Thursday. We drink coffee, swap stories, laugh louder than we're supposed to. And every week someone new walks in, pale, scared, silent, and we make space for her the way space was made for me. Sometimes people ask me why I never fought back sooner, why I stayed as long as I did, why I didn't scream, and I tell them, because screaming in a place that doesn't hear you is just noise, but silence used the right way can be thunder. They called it family. I called it prison. Now I call it the past. Some prisons don't have bars. Some abusers never raise their voice. And some survivors never need to fight with fists, because truth once spoken is louder than any blow. Celine's story is not just about one woman breaking free. It's about how silence can be weaponized and also reclaimed. It's about what happens when we stop asking for permission to be treated like people. If you've ever felt small in your own home, if you've ever been told to calm down, be grateful, or stop overreacting. Know this: you are not alone, and you are not crazy. You deserve more than survival. You deserve a life where you are safe, seen, and heard. If this story moved, you share it. Someone out there might need to hear this today. Leave a comment below your voice. Might be the one that gives someone else courage. Subscribe for more stories that bring hidden truths into the light. And remember, silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy.